The Age of Nationalism, 1850 to 1914. We turn our attention now to nationalism in Ireland. The Great Potato Famine had devastating impacts on the Irish population. Approximately 4 million people died in about 60 years from 1845 to 1911. As we saw previously, the British government did nothing to help the Irish people. Instead, the British government continued to enforce taxes, property taxes, and rents on the Irish people despite their suffering. This split the Irish people. Most of the people living in Southern Ireland were of the Catholic faith and blamed the British government for not helping them during this potato famine. It just so happened that most of the Irish living in the northern half of Ireland were Protestant. They were called the Ulsterites. These Ulsterites did not lay blame on the British government at all for its inactivity or lack of response. Instead, these Ulsterites stayed favorable to the British government. The Irish Catholics living in Southern Ireland demanded help from the British government, and the British government refused. The Irish Catholics then began to demand for the issue of home rule or independence be brought before the British Parliament so that the Irish people would have the opportunity to vote on the issue of whether or not they would stay a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain or whether or not they could achieve independence and home rule. Irish Catholics were on the side of home rule and independence for all of Ireland. The Ulsterites wanted to remain a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So the issue of the potato famine and Britain's lack of response led to growing nationalism among Southern Irish Catholics who wanted the creation of Ireland as a separate and independent nation. This issue of the potato famine and home rule for Ireland threatened to break that area of Ireland apart. Civil war was imminent in Ireland at about 1914. The Irish Catholics and Ulsterites were fighting each other over Britain's lack of response and the issue of home rule and independence for Ireland. So the potato famine was bad enough. Now the Catholics and Ulsterites in Ireland were fighting each other. That country was on the verge of a full-scale civil war in 1914 when World War I, or as it was called then, the Great War, broke out in Europe. The British government used nationalism and the threat of we and they, real and imaginary enemies, to bring all of the Irish people together to support the British against a common enemy that was very real in 1914, and that was the country of Germany and its allies of Austria, Hungary, and Italy. So if it had not been for the outbreak of World War I and successful attempts by the British to bring all of the Irish together, to put aside their differences, to fight against the common enemy of Germany, the country of Ireland probably would have been ripped apart, torn apart by civil war. In Italy, nationalism was about building a nation. Between 1814 and 1815, right at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, many nations around Europe were sending representatives to Vienna, Austria, to discuss the end of the Napoleonic Wars. What would happen in the event that Napoleon Bonaparte was finally defeated? Well, it was decided in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna, after Napoleon's defeat, that the map of Europe needed to be redrawn to go back to its old traditional boundaries. In other words, France's grand empire was wiped off the map of Europe, and instead, nations' boundaries were fixed to the way they had been prior to Napoleon's wars from 1799 to 1815. There was, however, a notable exception to that. Italy was taken out of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was divided into various sections at the Congress of Vienna. Italy was carved up into many different kingdoms at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 to appease various Italian families and various European powers. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, Italy effectively became a geographic expression. In other words, between 1815 and 1861, Italy was a place on a map, but not a unified country. Northeastern Italy was given away to Austria. Northwestern Italy and the Kingdom of Sardinia was given to one Italian noble family. For our purposes, the person who will inherit that area is King Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia and northwestern Italy. In central Italy, many kingdoms were carved out and given to various Italian noble families. One area was not touched at all, and that was the area around Rome called the Papal States. That territory in and around Rome belonged to the Roman Catholic Church. So it was stated at the Congress of Vienna that the Papal States did in fact officially belong to the Pope and Roman Catholic Church. Southern Italy, the section that looks like the toe and heel of a boot, along with the island of Sicily right off the toe of that boot, was called the Kingdom of Southern Italy and Two Sicilies. That area was given to France. So France was only allowed to keep one small section in Italy, despite the fact that France had conquered the whole of continental Europe with the exception of Great Britain. All it still had left of its old Napoleonic empire was southern Italy and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Leading the charge for Italian unification was King Victor Emmanuel, whose family had inherited northwestern Italy and Sardinia at the Congress of Vienna. King Victor Emmanuel reigned as the King of Sardinia and northwestern Italy from 1849 to 1861. His most important advisor was Count Cavour. These two men, Cavour and Emmanuel, desired to unite the whole of Italy and to free all of the foreign powers that were there and then unite all of that country to create a strong national state for all Italians. Because, in fact, Italians shared a common race, ethnicity, ancestry, culture, language, religion, and heritage. So Victor Emmanuel and Count Cavour became obsessed with the idea of nationalism, in particular self-determination, the creation of an Italian nation. The first step, they felt, was to gain control over the whole of northern Italy. Since they already had control over northwestern Italy, it made sense to start in their own neck of the woods, so to speak. So they felt that they should conquer northeastern Italy first. The problem, however, was that Sardinia had a very tiny army and was no match for the Austrian army. The Austrians were the ones, of course, who owned northeastern Italy. So King Victor Emmanuel looked for an ally in Europe, for someone who he knew did not like Austria and would be willing to help him drive out the Austrians from Italy. Let's just suffice it to say that Napoleon III of France did not like Austria. There were many issues which had surfaced to divide the French and Austrians into opposite camps. They did not like each other at all. They had a very tense diplomatic relationship at this time. So Napoleon III was ready and willing to help Victor Emmanuel free northeastern Italy from Austrian control. A combined force of Sardinians and French soldiers attacked northeastern Italy and the Austrian armies stationed there and successfully drove them out. Napoleon III handed to Victor Emmanuel and Count Cavour of Sardinia control of northeastern Italy. When word spread throughout central Italy that northeastern Italy had been freed from foreign control, the various Italian families who controlled those central states decided to do the right thing and join up with Victor Emmanuel to create a unified Italian state. That meant all that was left was the Papal States and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. No one in Italy was going to mess with the Pope's Papal States, so it was allowed to remain free, though the Roman Catholic Church did cede the majority of its territory to the newly created country of Italy in 1861, so that, to this very day, the only territory controlled in Rome by the Catholic Church is an area called Vatican City. It's one square city block. It is the smallest independent country in the whole world, and the leader of it, of course, is the Roman Catholic Pope. So the Papal States are left alone, though the Pope did, for the good of nationalism in Italy, cede the majority of his territory. That left only southern Italy and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Unfortunately, that area was occupied by France, and the leader of France was Napoleon III, who had just helped Victor Emmanuel drive out the Austrians from northeastern Italy. So Victor Emmanuel knew that he had to handle this very carefully, or he would end up in a war with Napoleon III in France, which he did not want. There happened to be a rebel rouser down in southern Italy by the name of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who lived from 1807 to 1882. Garibaldi is a very popular, heroic figure in Italian history. Garibaldi had campaigned for the unification of Italy earlier, before Victor Emmanuel decided that it was his idea. Garibaldi had been calling for unification of all Italians, but the time wasn't right. Now it was. Victor Emmanuel and Count Cavour met with Garibaldi and encouraged him to more or less cause problems for the 20,000 or so royal troops stationed by France in southern Italy and the Two Sicilies. But what they cautioned him about was that they would more or less play dumb to it, that if questioned, they would claim that they had no role or no responsibility for Garibaldi's actions, that he was acting of his own accord. Garibaldi was just a kind of fiery figure who would love this kind of challenge. So he put together a force of 1,000 Italian nationalists called red shirts, because they wore red shirts as a symbol of their desire for the unification of Italy. Red became sort of the signature color for Italians who were for unification. Garibaldi and his red shirts antagonized and aggravated the 20,000 or so royal soldiers that were stationed in southern Italy. It just so happened that Napoleon III had given most of the commissions in southern Italy and Two Sicilies to soldiers who were nearing retirement. This was considered to be sort of a cushy last assignment. In other words, these French soldiers were just making time until retirement, and they were not interested in fighting Garibaldi and 1,000 guys. Of course, they could have done great damage and had it over with quickly, but what if, on the off chance, they got injured in the process or killed? They were so near retirement, they were not interested. So Garibaldi aggravated the French soldiers, antagonized them more or less, was just a nuisance, and word spread back to Napoleon III that his men were refusing to fight. Napoleon III sort of understood where they were coming from, and being a bit sympathetic to nationalism in Italy, he gave orders to recall all of his 20,000 royal soldiers. So, southern Italy and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was very easily freed from French royal control. Napoleon III was trying to save face. He didn't want stories circulating throughout Europe that his men were being humiliated by the red shirts. So, in 1860, all of Italy was free of foreign control, and all of the families who controlled central Italy had given up control of their territories to Victor Emmanuel. The Pope had even ceded the majority of his territory to Victor Emmanuel. So, in 1860, with the freeing of southern Italy and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies by Garibaldi, all of Italy was free to join Victor Emmanuel. An election was held in 1861. Male voters were asked essentially a few questions on which to vote. One was if they thought now that all of Italian territory should be unified as one nation called the Kingdom of Italy. Vote yes or no. And a second question was, should Italy be a constitutional monarchy, and would the Italian people vote to elect Victor Emmanuel as the first king of a unified Italy? overwhelmingly the response to all three questions was yes. So in 1861, with an election, the Kingdom of Italy was officially created. Victor Emmanuel was elected as the King of Italy, and Italy became a constitutional monarch. Victor Emmanuel and Count Cavour were rewarded for their efforts in unifying Italy by being the first king and minister of a unified Italy. The first king was Victor Emmanuel. His minister and chief advisor in this newly created Kingdom of Italy was Count Cavour. Next, we look at nationalism in Germany, quote unquote. But it is important to note that before 1871, there was no country called Germany. Just to recap what I said in our discussion of Italy just a moment ago, in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna, the map of Europe was redrawn after defeating Napoleon. His grand empire was wiped away, and in its place, all of the traditional boundaries of Europe were reestablished, as if the Napoleonic Wars had never even happened. The only exception to that was the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire had been made up of two parts, German states and Italian states. Those areas were divided. As we saw before, those Italian states were separated from the German states and divided among various Italian noble families, Austria, France, and the papacy. The German section of the old Holy Roman Empire was divided at the Congress of Vienna into 38 separate independent states of German people. This, of course, goes against the idea of nationalism. Just like we saw in Italy, according to nationalism, all Italian people should be united. So, the same goes in Germany. There was a desire after the Congress of Vienna among many German people to unite and have one large state, or in other words, a nation for all German people. In the German Confederation, there were two large and powerful states. These were Austria and Prussia. Austria was slightly bigger in land size than Prussia, and this was a sore spot. The Prussians worked to undermine the power of Austria. In other words, Prussians felt that if there was going to be one German state, it should be Prussia, that Prussia should expand and sort of suck in and bring in all of the other German states under the rule of Prussia. Austria felt, no, if any German state is going to take over and expand into all the others, it should be Austria. So there was a great deal of tension between Austria and Prussia. This tension grew worse because of a Prussian creation called the Zollverein. The Zollverein was a German customs union created by Prussia, and it was in existence from 1834 to 1853. The Zollverein was an attempt by Prussia to strengthen its economy at the expense of Austria. What the Prussians did was they unified all of the German states into a friendly tariff situation with the exception of Austria, meaning that all 37 states that were invited to participate in the Zollverein saw each other as economic friends rather than as rivals. So, the states that were participating in the Zollverein would send their products to other German states free of charge. That meant that Austrian products were highly taxed and no one would buy them. Austria suffered terribly economically because of the Zollverein. This tension between Austria and Prussia grew because of Prussia's king, William I, who reigned from 1861 to 1888, and his chief advisor, Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck believed that in order for Prussia to be the most powerful state, it had to get bigger. That meant that it had to be bigger than Austria. So William and Bismarck had a phrase or motto by which they operated. Blood and iron was key to Prussia's success, meaning that they would use the blood of the Prussian people to beat Austria in war if necessary, and they would use the iron or power of the Prussian economy and industry to beat Austria economically. So Bismarck and William I of Prussia began to talk about how to goad Austria into war. In this time period, it was not considered to be very ethical or gentlemanly just to declare war on a country or state because you didn't like it. You actually were supposed to have a reason for it. So William I and Bismarck think of a way that they can get into a war with Austria and defeat them without looking unethical or non-gentlemanlike. So Bismarck comes up with an idea. There was a tiny state called Schleswig-Holstein that existed just at the very tip of these German states, but it was under the control of Denmark at this time, and that went against nationalism. You may remember we have said that one of the key ideas of nationalism is that each ethnic group should have its own independent or separate country. So it made no sense to Germans that German people living in Schleswig-Holstein would be under the control of the Danish people living in Denmark. So Bismarck and William I asked Austria if Austria would be willing to declare war along with Prussia on Denmark to gain Schleswig-Holstein. Now, we should point out that Prussia and Austria had tried to take Schleswig-Holstein from Denmark in 1848 and had failed. The year now is 1864. Prussia is much more powerful in 1864 than it had been in 1848. Now we have to understand the working of Bismarck's mind here. Bismarck is a very crafty politician. His desire is to get some sort of reason to go to war against Austria. Schleswig-Holstein is going to play a role in this. What he hopes will happen is that Prussia and Austria will defeat Denmark and agree in the process to co-rule Schleswig-Holstein. He knows that there's absolutely no way that the Austrians and Prussians can share and play nice with this new territory of Schleswig-Holstein, that they would quickly start to bicker over who should own what and how much and how it should be controlled, and this would give him a reason to declare war on Austria. So in 1864, Austria and Prussia go to war in the name of German nationalism to free the Germans who live in Schleswig-Holstein from Denmark. They succeed. In 1864, Schleswig-Holstein is freed from Denmark. As promised, Austria and Prussia agreed to jointly rule Schleswig-Holstein. But by 1866, Austria and Prussia were bickering nonstop over how Schleswig-Holstein should be governed. This led Bismarck and William I of Prussia to declare war on Austria. Therefore, in 1866, we have a war called the Austro-Prussian War. On the surface, the issue appears to be who will own Schleswig-Holstein, but the real issue is power. Who is going to be the most powerful German state? Will it be Prussia or Austria? And whoever wins this war will have the right to expand its control into the other German states. Well, the Austro-Prussian War is a huge embarrassment for Austria. They were beat severely in 7 weeks. This is sometimes called in German history the 7 Weeks' War. In just 7 weeks, the Prussians succeeded in totally annihilating the Austrian army. So in 1866, Prussia owns Schleswig-Holstein. At that point, the German states of the German Confederation are asked if they would be willing to join up with Prussia. Since Prussia was located in the northern section of the German Confederation, this just made sense. So the northern German states agreed after Prussia's defeat of Austria to join up with Prussia. So in 1866, Prussia gained Schleswig-Holstein and control over the whole northern section of the German Confederation. All that is left is control over Austria and the southern German states. But Bismarck and William I have decided that they do not want physical control over Austria. What they want to do is create one large German nation that excludes their old enemies of Austria. The Austrians, if the Prussians have their way, will not be a part of this newly created nation of Germany. So Bismarck starts to work on, along with William I, how to gain control over the southern German states. Well, if we look at the location of the southern German states within the German Confederation, we see that they neighbor France. So Bismarck and William I feel like if they can scare those southern German states into fearing an invasion by France, that those southern German states would run to Prussia seeking help. Obviously, they're not going to ask Austria for aid because Austria was just humiliatingly defeated by Prussia. So Bismarck and William I goad France into war over the issue of who should be the next king of Spain. They argue over whether or not, because there's a vacancy for the King of Spain at the time and no clear heir exists. So Bismarck suggests that a cousin of William I would make an excellent Spanish king. Napoleon III of France suggests that it should be one of his relatives. Now, there is no reason why that kind of discussion should end up in war. This is actually none of France's or Prussia's business anyway. But the two get so heated over this that they declare war on each other in 1870. In the Franco-Prussian War, which lasts from 1870 to 1871, the Prussians annihilate the French army. You may remember I said previously Napoleon III was popular until he got into a disastrous war with a neighboring German state called Prussia. Well, in 1871, the people of Paris were starving because the Prussians had cut off their supply lines. Napoleon III had no choice but to surrender, and in 1871, France was defeated by Prussia. During the Franco-Prussian War, just as Bismarck had predicted, the southern German states began to fear for their own safety. They were afraid that France would invade them, so they rushed to Prussia and asked for aid. Would you be willing to give us support and backing should France invade? Well, Bismarck and William I used this as an opportunity. They told the southern German states that they would only protect them from France if the southern German states promised that in the event that Prussia defeated France, that these southern German states would join up with Prussia to the exclusion of Austria and make one huge united German state. The southern German states agreed to that. So in 1871, Prussia defeats France. The southern German states keep their end of the bargain and join up with Prussia. So, in 1871, Prussia controls all of the German states except Austria, which it could have if it wanted to. But just to be mean and nasty, Prussia declares that all of the German states of the German Confederation, with the exception of Austria, would be united into one nation for Germans called Germany or the German Empire. They excluded Austria, and still to this very day, if you look at a map of Europe, you will see that there are two countries, Germany and Austria. There is no difference between a German person and an Austrian person. Austrian and German is the same thing, but because of events dating back to 1871, we have Germans living in Germany and Germans living in Austria as a separate country. After unification in 1871, Germany, newly created, feels that it has a responsibility to win the total support of its people, and to do this, they develop the idea of a common enemy. So, the German government starts what is called Kulturkampf, and this is an attempt to unite all of the German people behind the newly created German government. Kulturkampf translates as struggle for civilization. And basically what the German government does is they turn against the Catholic Church and tell people that putting their loyalty to the church first is not what a good German should do. In other words, they start sort of like a propaganda campaign that Germans should focus first on loyalty to the state, loyalty to the church secondly. So a move begins in Germany of anti-Catholicism, and it succeeds. Very quickly, the country of Germany becomes anti-Catholic and pro-Protestant. They also create a social welfare system in Germany to buy the support of the people. This social welfare system was financed by taxes and included things like unemployment benefits, workman's compensation, pension or retirement, insurance, and Social Security. Social Security was invented by Germany in 1889. Lots of Americans think that our president, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who led us through the Great Depression and World War II, was responsible for creating Social Security. He was not. He brought the concept of Social Security to the United States of America, true, but he was inspired by the Germans, who had invented Social Security in 1889. So as a result of the ideology of nationalism, the German states were united into one, with the exception of Austria. They united against the Catholic Church to become a stronger country that put loyalty to the state first rather than loyalty to the church, and they moved towards progress by bringing in various aspects of liberalism and socialism in their social welfare system. And this ends our look at the age of nationalism.